Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts About the 40K Universe. I am your host Gershwin and you are watching One Mind Syndicate. Today we continue talking about the Space Wolves as the Space Wolves actually fight the Imperial Guard. This is going to be one of those situations where the Space Wolves fight a traitorous faction of the Imperial Guard, not really a chaos worshipping Imperial Guard, just traitorous in general. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. We post Warhammer 40K content every single day, and if you have any suggestions, comment down below. But with that said, let's get into 40 facts on the Space Wolves versus the Imperial Guard. Within the Space Wolves' mighty citadel, known as the Fang, is the Hall of Heroes. Here statues and trophies and relics honor the triumphs of the greatest champions of the Space Wolves chapter. Here are commemorated those great warriors whose sagas stand as record for the Space Wolves' most glorious deeds. Even amongst these legends, Cairo Grimblood holds a place of honor, for it was he and his great company that saved Fenris at the time of ultimate peril. Cairo Grimblood had come to command a great company of Space Wolves at a time when the Imperium of Man was weak and all hope was drained from the great masses of humanity. It seemed that the Emperor had forsaken mankind, but nobody knew that the Emperor was fighting his own deadly battle within the warp, and that the very existence of humanity hung by a thread. During the long, dark age of apostasy of the 36th millennium, several decades after the death of the infamous High Lord Goj Vandire, many false prophets appeared throughout this archaic age, some little more than madmen, leading rebel bands, other spiritual demagogues who commanded whole worlds and armies. The most powerful of these was the apostate cardinal of Galthamor, Bucharest, whose heresies reached such proportions it became known as the Plague of Unbelief. The cardinal world of Galthamor was not a rich diocese, but Bucharest, driven by jealousy of his peers' achievements, vowed to build one of the largest temples to the Emperor's glory on his own cardinal world. After brutally enslaving the population of Galthamor, Bucharest still needed more men and resources. Using an army of thugs and cutthroats, he conquered the nearby world of Randa. With access to the richer mines of the world, Bucharest's wealth grew. It was also here, in the Randa system, that Bucharest joined forces with the renegade Imperial Navy Admiral Shehala and the Colonel Gaston of the 25th Regilian Imperial Guard Regiment. With these forces at his disposal, Bucharest was able to carve out a small stellar empire to the galactic west of Terra, and within the next 7 standard years, 50 star systems had fallen under his control. Isolated from Terra by a great concentration of warp storms, Bucharest preached that Terra had fallen to the enemies of the Emperor, and set about establishing himself as the head of the ecclesiarchy. Having no contact with the Imperium, the people of the region had no way of knowing the truth, and soon the armies of Bucharest were advancing on nearby star systems, imposing their cruel regimes on every world they conquered. Bucharest preached a particular strain of the Imperial Creed, which held that salvation was only to be found through personal strength and the casting out of the weak. Only through advancing his own interest at the expense of others could a man attain divinity. Bucharest preached a doctrine that ran counter to the Imperial Creed's assertion that only through sacrifice for the good of humanity would deliverance at the hands of the God Emperor be granted. Armies fought for him. Sick and depraved individuals gathered underneath his dark banner. Xenos flocked to his court, and the Chaos Gods worked their evil under his protection. His armies of fanatical devotees marched across the galaxy, conquering all before them, subjugating one world after another, and growing stronger with every fresh conquest. In a single bold sweep, the forces of Bucharest leapt from the distant galaxy's east to the very heart of the Imperium. The armies of Bucharest continued to conquer world after world, and only when their conquest infringed upon the Space Wolves chapter of the Adeptus Astartes did events turn against them. During this time of great upheaval, the Space Wolves kept themselves distant from the infighting and the treachery infecting the Imperium, preferring instead to defend the system around their homeworld. But Bucharest's encroachment into the system around Fenris was all the cause the Space Wolves needed, and soon full-scale war erupted between the Space Wolves and the forces of the renegade Cardinal. A massive invasion fleet soon arrived within range of Fenris, and a fierce space battle broke out. Though the Space Wolves' small picket fleet was grievously outnumbered, they succeeded in crippling many of the renegade vessels before escaping, beginning a hit-and-run campaign against Bucharest's rebel fleet that that would last for many standard years. Braving the punishing fire from the Fang's many defense lasers, thousands of troop transports descended on Fenris. Though many were reduced to flaming wreckages, others arrived intact and disgorged troops and vehicles onto the continent of Azaheim. Bucharest's forces cut a bloody swath across Azaheim, dogged at every turn by the vicious Fenrisian weather, the scout parties of the Space Wolves, and even the indigenous human population of Fenris. Whole communities were butchered as Bucharest's savage army approached the Fang. Villages were razed to the ground, and thousands were enslaved. Soon the Fang was surrounded by a sea of traitorous soldiers that stretched off into the horizon. But for all their numbers and brutality, the forces of the apostate cardinal were a small match for the kindled fury of the Space Wolves. Enraged at the treatment of their fellow Fenrisians and the temerity of these renegades at invading their realm, they struck back with all the savagery they could muster. Wolf Scouts severed lines of communication, assassinated leaders with pinpoint attacks, exploded munition caches, and sowed discord amongst the foe. Blood claws emerged from hidden passageways beneath the Fang, hurling themselves at the traitors in gore-soaked frenzy. Longfangs executed careful ambushes, eliminating armored convoys with heavy weapons fire, and collapsing mountainous valleys onto mile-long convoys of vehicles and enemy reinforcements. For 3 standard years, the fanatical armies of Bucharest pounded upon the gates of the Fang. The apostate cardinal threw his best warriors against the mighty citadel, promising them wealth and glory beyond measure, should they be victorious. For 3 standard years, the Space Wolves held them at bay, inflicting monstrous casualties every time they repelled an assault. Attack after attack, bombardment after bombardment, fell against the walls and the gates of the Fang, and yet the citadel remained unbreached. Bucharest drew in more and more soldiers, though even his forces on distant Galthamore were a quarter of their normal strength. Believing his property secure, he mustered his armies for one last assault to sweep all resistance before him. Millions died as the native Fenrisians fought a protracted guerrilla war against the invaders. Though they tried many times to penetrate the attackers' line, the Space Wolves were unable to do anything to break the siege. Fate intervened once more, but this time to deal a cruel blow to Bucharest's plan, for the salvation of Fenris had come in the form of the Wolf Lord, Cairo Grimblood. Grimblood's great company had departed from Fenris 5 Terran years before, returning from a great hunt within the Eye of Terror. Now he had returned just in time, as the besieging forces gathered for the final attack. Out beyond the furthest planet in the system, reality tore itself apart as the Space Wolves' warfleet emerged from the warp. As Bucharest's own vessels investigated, they were confronted by an armada of Space Wolves' battle barges, returning to their home planet. The Space Wolves lost no time in attacking, smashing nearly half of Bucharest's renegade fleet in their first strike. Caught between the newcomers and the attack of the remaining Space Wolves vessels from the center of the star system, the Admiral ordered a withdrawal and fled the system, leaving the renegade soldiers on Fenris to meet their fate. The counterattack of Cairo Grimblood's great company smashed into the enemy's flanks, killing tens of thousands of traitor guardsmen and scattering thousands of their numbers into the forbidden forests of the continent of Azaheim. Driven by hunger, ravenous packs of Fenrisian wolves fell upon the fleeing heretics and consumed them. Drop pods disgorged great hunter packs into the heart of the enemy, while Thunderhawk gunships deployed predators and land raiders into dominating positions. Grimblood himself plunged into battle alongside the warriors of his elite bodyguards, the Oath Brothers, more than 50 Wolf Guard veterans in Terminator armor, who tore the heart out of the traitor's command structure. The besieged Space Wolves finally broke out to seal the fate of the traitors, and the battle was won. Retreating and leaderless, the Renegade's fate was sealed. Of those few that escaped the wrath of the enraged Space Wolves, none survived the giant Fenrisian wolf packs or vicious climate of Azaheim. The apostate cardinal managed to escape on a shuttle to link up with his admiral, who dropped back out of the warp to briefly rendezvous with his fellow conqueror. Leaving Fenrisian to the Space Wolves, Bucharest pulled back his northern forces and consolidated his hold on the rest of his domain. Grimblood had not only saved Fenris, but possibly Terra itself. By depleting the apostate cardinal's forces, Grimblood granted the chance for Confessor Dolan Kairosis to successfully investigate and lead his revolt against the corrupted madman. From that point on, Star system after star system defied Bucharest, the faithful rising up to resist his forces by whatever means possible, even when they were slaughtered in their attempt. It was not yet the end of Bucharest, whose armies were as numerous as the stars, but it represented the turning point in the war against the apostate cardinal, and the end of the plague of unbelief. The victory of Kyle Grimblood was heralded as the rebirth of a unified and powerful Imperium. And those were 40 facts on the Space Wolves versus the Imperial Guard. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to share it with your friends on Reddit or Facebook. It helps out the channel when you do so. The best part about this whole lore is the fact that regular humans were able to fight Astartes. And not only that, but the Imperial Guard was able to fight the Space Wolves on Fenris. Yes, of course, not all Space Wolf companies were actually on Fenris. Most of them were gone. So the fact that like one company came and basically wiped out the entire Imperial Guard traitorous legion, it kind of makes sense. I mean, at the end of the day, they are superhuman Astartes, and they just came from fighting demons. What is a couple of traitorous guardsmen gonna do? But it's still fun lore. This is the type of lore that you want to use to build an Imperial Guard army, not really to build a Space Marine army. Because if you create your own Space Marine army or your own Space Marine chapter, and you say, yeah, they defended traitorous Imperial Guardsmen who were led by, so-and-so, it's not as cool. It's like, well, you're Space Marines. Of course you're going to defend the planet against Imperial Guard or regular humans. That's not a big deal. But if you have an Imperial Guard regiment and you are saying that they defended a traitorous Space Marine army or a Space Marine army that for whatever reason thought that they could take on the planet or get rid of the planet, that adds some badassness to your Imperial Guard regiment. So if you do want to make a custom Imperial Guard regiment, throw in some lore where they fight Space Wolves or Imperial Fists or even Chaos. I just think that including loyalist Space Marines, it's a little, I don't know, it's more badass to say like the regiment stood against the loyalist Space Marines. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope it helps you build your own lore. If you guys have any other suggestions, comment down below. If you enjoy what we do, support us on Patreon. A simple $1 a month helps us create more videos for you guys. If you can't support us on Patreon, it's okay. Simply by liking, commenting, and sharing, it helps out the channel. So if you have your own lore that you're building, comment down below, and then maybe you can share your ideas for either an Imperial Guard regiment or for a Space Marine chapter. But thanks for everything, guys, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. This was Gershwan with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.